We're going to get started here. We may have a few people coming late. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name's Scott Grummer, fisheries biologist here at Clear Lake. A lot of folks have probably already heard about a year ago right now is when we first discovered Eurasian water milfoil, and since then we've had a more recent discovery, and that's what kind of stimulated this meeting tonight. With us tonight are some of our folks out of the aquatic plant and aquatic invasive species programs based out of central Iowa. These are statewide folks that deal with these aquatic plants in much greater detail than I do as a fisheries biologist. So I'm going to turn it over to them. We'll go through the program kind of presenting what we know and what we've used for strategies. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions and answers, and that's a perfect time, to dialogue with us, and we'll get, your questions answered if you have any of those. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Euchner, our aquatic vegetation biologist.
All right, can everybody hear me all right? Is it working online? All right. If you cannot hear me or I wander off with my voice, just raise your hand. I'm sensitive to hearing impaired people because I can't hear. So if you need to get a hold of me, put your hand up. I'm going to go over some of the timeline that Scott talked about and then what we can do moving forward, what management will look like on a large scale. Clear Lake is a large lake that we would consider in Iowa. We've managed milfoil in smaller systems for years. We'll go over that here, but Clear Lake presents a challenge much like East Okoboji did and much like West Okoboji did. So that's why we're kind of here to, for one, explain what happens, what we're dealing with, and then what we can do moving forward. And then Kim's going to get up in the tail end of my presentation and kind of highlight what we can do while we're putting a plan together to prevent the spread of this plant going somewhere else, steps we can take, things we can do here at Clear Lake to protect other water bodies nearby Clear Lake. So I will get started. Make sure it doesn't take off on us here with 3 or 4 slides. So this is a brief overview of what I'll be going over tonight. Really quickly, what is Eurasian water milfoil and why is it a problem? Iowa's history managing Eurasian water milfoil, we have a history going back to 1994 dealing with this plant. Actually, out of this region, the Clear Lake Fish Management Team was the first team in Iowa that dealt with Eurasian water milfoil. Herbicide options for a large scale. There's a lot of herbicides available, but what we have narrowed our toolbox down to deal with large scale milfoil infestations in a lake. And then the proper ID and why that's important as we move forward, what we have learned about Eurasian water milfoil, some of the new tools we have available to us to help us manage this plant, because Eurasian water milfoil does hybridize with northern water milfoil, which is a native plant. But we have tools to identify those species and also new herbicides that effectively manage those hybrid species. We'll go over what management actions have already taken place. You may have heard, as Scott mentioned, we found this plant in late fall of last year. There have been a couple management activities that have taken place. What we're looking for now is what we're going to do next. And then we'll highlight some of those management options moving forward. This isn't working, is it?
No, you're good.
Okay. All right, so who in here has heard of Eurasian water milfoil? All right, so we all know what the plant is. Scott went on a mission today and got us some live plants. So he has Eurasian water milfoil over there from Willow Creek. We can look at those, but I also have a couple pictures in here. It's important to know what it looks like, but at the end of the day, we already have a plant identified in Clear Lake that we have to deal with. So this is a non-native, so it's not from North America. Submerged rooted aquatic plant. It's native to Europe and Asia. A lot of our non-native plants come from Europe and Asia. This lacks a turion, and the turion is like an overwintering seed structure. This lake also has curly-leaf pondweed in it, which when we talk about curly-leaf pondweed management, you will hear turion being in that discussion. And our northern water milfoil has what's called an overwintering turion. Eurasian water milfoil more or less grows out of a root crown, an overwintering root crown that is a mass of material that stays on the bottom of that lake, and it stays green, and it stays green for a long time. That is good for us as we have developed new methods to manage this plant. We can treat this plant late fall, winter, and into early spring. We used to traditionally only treat it in the spring and summer. Knowing this about the plant, that you can effectively control it by treating those root crowns, is rather important, especially for long-term management for native plants to stay in Clear Lake. So it really starts to grow after water temperatures reach 55 degrees in the spring. This is the same as curly leaf pondweed. We have curly leaf pondweed in this lake as well. That is another non-native. And it grows late into the fall. That that Eurasian water milfoil out in Clear Lake is probably still growing wherever it is hiding. We've looked for it in many places, we've found it in a few places, and we've treated it, but there's probably milfoil somewhere out in that lake that we have not found. It reproduces by fragmentation mainly, but we've also determined in the Midwest that it can reproduce by seed. It's probably less likely to reproduce by seed than it is fragmentation. So management of this plant, you'll hear a lot of folks talk about mechanical removal of aquatic plants. You really don't want to do that with Eurasian water milfoil, because all you're doing is propagating the plant. You're chopping it up, letting it drift around the lake. That section of plant falls to the sediment, develops a new plant. So you do not want to chop this plant up. And as I've already mentioned, it can hybridize with northern water milfoil. We're getting new information. Lots of other state agencies are sending in plant samples. We're finding out there's quite a bit of hybrid variety of this plant out there. What we're dealing with in Clear Lake is not a hybrid variety. It is a Eurasian water milfoil, and we know this. We've had the plant tested. So I brought some pictures. Scott brought some real plants. I would just say what most folks get native plants confused with Eurasian water milfoil is coontail. They will see coontail out there, and I'm sorry I don't have any pictures of coontail, but they'll get coontail and they think they have Eurasian water milfoil. Coontail will grow in whorls, but the leaves are forked. You're going to notice here that these come off the stem, but there's no forking in the leaves. There's typically on Eurasian water milfoil, you're dealing with 9 to 21, 22 pairs of leaflets on that plant. And there's going to be 4 separate going around the stem. Northern water milfoil is going to look just like this, except it's going to have 7 to 9 pairs of leaflets. So it can get really confusing for somebody that doesn't look at plants all the time. And the hybrid milfoil can actually have characteristics of both plants on the same actual plant that you pull out of the lake. Oftentimes you have to send that in for genetic. Is this a northern water milfoil? Is this a Eurasian, or is this a hybrid? And that takes a little bit of time to get those results back. The one thing also, before I move on, Eurasian water milfoil, when you pull it out of the water, compared to coontail and compared to northern water milfoil, Eurasian water milfoil will collapse on itself. It is a very weak plant out of water. It will collapse in your hand, very fine, very feathery. Coontail is not. Coontail is very robust. It can stand up on its own in your hand. Same with northern water milfoil. Very robust, can stand up on its own in your hand. So here's the next one. So we have it. What's the big deal? I would argue that Eurasian water milfoil is going to behave differently in every lake that you find it in. Where Clear Lake would be somewhat susceptible is we just got to a clear water state. We're just getting native plants coming back. There's still voids out there and habitat where Eurasian water milfoil could come in and become established and then can potentially outcompete other plants. So milfoil focuses all its energy once it starts growing straight to the surface. Once it gets to the surface, it branches out and creates a surface mat. The habitat provided under that mat isn't quite as much as some of our native plants for, say, fish habitat. So fish can use it for habitat, but it's not the better option for them compared to our native plants. That dense canopy at the surface reduces sunlight to the sediment where our native plants are waiting to germinate. Oftentimes our native plants germinate later in the year than Eurasian water milfoil. So Eurasian water milfoil beats it to the surface, crowds the surface out, blocks the sunlight so the natives can't get the sunlight to germinate. It can also cause navigation issue for lake users. That dense surface mat can cause problems for motorboat, canoe, kayaks, any sort of water-related activity is going to struggle to navigate through that surface mat. It can also reduce flow in ditches and canals. As this plant were to leave Clear Lake, it could get into canals, ditches. It can reduce flow because of that large surface mat. Water cannot move as freely. Again, I don't think I need to mention it. We've already talked about the natives, but it will reduce your aquatic plant diversity of native plants. Clear Lake's starting to come back. You're starting to get some desirable natives out there that you haven't seen for a long time. It'll impact predator-prey relationships. Any plant at a high density can start to impact predator-prey relationships within a fish population. That goes for any aquatic plant that we're managing. And then it's been shown that it is a low-quality food source for waterfowl. A lot of waterfowl use this lake. They wouldn't get nearly as much out of, say, Eurasian water milfoil as it would from valsinaria or wild celery or some of our other native plants that produce seeds like sago pondweed, flat stem pondweed. It's a lower food source for those waterfowl species. So history of milfoil management in Iowa. This is a lovely lake in southwest Iowa called Carter Lake. We're managing milfoil down there. This is what a surface mat of milfoil looks like. There's not much going on under that canopy, but that canopy makes navigation almost impossible to get through. That's what a pretty abundant population of Eurasian water milfoil would look like. That lake doesn't have many other species to compete with it. But our history goes back to 1994. You were not here in you were here in 94. So two folks that were involved in this, we still have one here, but Jim Wall and Tom Gingurki and Scott were leaders in the Midwest treating Eurasian water milfoil. The product that they used in this treatment was registered in 1986. Lots of other states still don't like using it. They also don't manage milfoil like we do. But we've been very aggressive as a state through the AIS program through all the years. We've been using many different products. Typically, we try to target eradication when possible. So a lot of our smaller lakes outside of, say, Clear Lake, West Okoboji, East Okoboji, what we would do, and we'll talk about this later, is we treat the whole volume of water with a systemic herbicide to target eradication of the plant. In many situations, we've been very successful. For instance, this treatment right here was at Crystal Lake in 1994. They went in with Sonar, which is a product that we still use, very safe product, very good product to control Eurasian water milfoil in curlyleaf. They treated it 15 parts per billion. We didn't know at that time what milfoil would respond to. For reference, what we've learned throughout the years, and we help other states with milfoil management, we can now eliminate milfoil with 5 parts per billion. So we're using less product than they used back in those days. If we were to treat Crystal Lake today, which we did in 2020, so it took 1994 to 2020 for milfoil to find its way back into Crystal Lake. We survey 100 to 150 lakes a year. A lot of these water bodies, our boats are in a couple times a year making sure that the milfoil is gone after a plant treatment. Crystal Lake did not have milfoil again until 2020. So you got from 1994 to 2020 in control on that original treatment. We went back in and treated it at 5 parts per billion to 6 parts per billion. We survey it 2 to 3 times a year. We still do not have Eurasian water milfoil in Crystal Lake. With that being said, the product that they were using was a lot cheaper. Everything goes up with time and cost. We can still manage Crystal Lake cheaper than they did in 1994 because we're using less product. So we use a very, very low dose of Sonar on treatments like this. And other systems in Iowa that flow is a problem, let's say the watershed's too big, we can't do this type of a treatment, we'll get into this later. We've used a suite of other products to contain Eurasian water milfoil. Some of those populations are still there, but they're just managed every single year. We have not eradicated them because the watershed size or the system is too complex to be able to treat every single plant. But for the most part, we try to treat the whole lake. So based on that, when we step away from what we've done in the past, what we've learned, what type of water bodies we've treated, when we look at a system like Clear Lake, we look at a system like West Okoboji, East Okoboji, Spirit Lake, if we get Eurasian water milfoil in there, we have to handle it differently than we would a 100 or 200 or 300 acre lake that we can handle with one treatment of sonar. So what we have here, these are a suite of products that we use based on what our goals are, what management strategy we're using on the water body. So Reward or Tribune, those are trade names. The active ingredient is diquat. It's been registered since 1986. We use it a lot. We use it to control many different species of aquatic plants. It's a non-selective contact herbicide. Typically, if you're applying at the labeled rate, you're going to kill whatever it touches. It is not selective in species at all. It's going to kill whatever aquatic plant it touches. So that one we use for spot treatments. It cannot be used for a whole lake treatment. It often struggles when you get water deeper than 8 to 9 feet because it has to contact every part of the plant to kill it. If a part of the plant doesn't get touched by that chemical, it can recover. So, but it's also our most economical option for treating. If you've been paying attention to the news, we'll talk about it here in a second, but diquat is what we used on the 150 acre spot treatment out on Clear Lake last month. Yep. Sonar AS, you've already heard me kind of talk about Sonar. It's been registered since 1986 as well. It is a systemic herbicide, so it will work its way into the plant and kill it. It doesn't have to touch the whole plant. The issue with Sonar is it's a long contact time, so 30, 60, 90, 120 days, depending on how you dose out your recipe for management. Fluoridone is its active ingredient, and the only way you can use this is you're treating the whole volume of water. We have gotten by in some systems in the summer. If we're going to treat, we can treat above the thermocline, but for winter treatments to manage Eurasian water milfoil or curly leaf pondweed, you have to treat the whole volume of water. So, but you're treating in parts per billion, so very low concentration. But you need a long contact time, so rain events, larger watershed to lake ratios, we cannot use Sonar. But in watersheds like Clear Lake, we can absolutely use Sonar because we're dealing with less than 5 to 1. 2.3 to 1, even better. We've used it in systems up to 20 and 30 to 1 and been very successful. Percellacor EC is the newest product, and I am not even remotely going to attempt that active ingredient. This is the newest tool in the toolbox. This is the probably, there's only 17 or 18 registered herbicides for use in the aquatic environment. Percellacor was registered in 2017. Iowa got access to it in 2020, 2021. We are certified to use it. A Category 5 alone won't allow you to use Percellacor. You have to go through some training from CPRO, which is the manufacturers of Percellacor, and they happen to produce Sonar as well, to be able to use that product. It's a very fast-acting systemic. So it is a systemic herbicide just like Sonar, but it finds its way into the plant at the speeds of a contact herbicide like Reward or Tribune. So it can get into the plant fast. So if you have a flow or a watershed issue where you have a lot of water coming through or you have a lot of turnover, Percellacor can be used in those situations because it will get into the plant, then start killing it. And it eliminates the plant much faster than Sonar will. It does have a price to it, though. It is more expensive than Sonar, so you have to kind of weigh the economics of a treatment with Percellacor. You can do spot treatments with it as well. So you can do spot treatments or whole lake treatments with Percellacor because of that speed that it finds its way into the plant. And it is also, not to keep going on this, it is also one of the products that is very, very effective on hybrid milfoil. It has been shown there are some varieties of hybrid milfoil in Michigan and some strains of Eurasian water milfoil in Michigan, we don't have any in Iowa or Minnesota that we know of yet, that show resistance to Sonar AS. Sometimes you have to turn up the rate to 10, 15 parts per billion, but when you start turning that rate up, it starts costing a lot more money. So that proper ID and genetics is a new tool that we have. It's important. Thankfully, with what we're dealing here with Clear Lake, and we'll also talk about Mason City, that's a new one that you folks will hear about. Iowa has both Eurasian water milfoil and northern water milfoil, and because of that, we have the possibility of new hybrid varieties showing up if these plants are allowed to exist in a system together. That's one of the reasons we've tried to maintain an aggressive stance on Eurasian water milfoil, because the longer it occupies a lake with northern water milfoil, the better chance you have of a hybrid variety coming out of that situation, and that hybrid variety could wind up being one that is somewhat resistant to herbicide options that we have. So the leaflet count, the morphology, we already went through that. Don't need to touch that again. Hybrid milfoil has characteristics of both Eurasian water milfoil and northern water milfoil. Thankfully, there is a lab out at Montana State University that is very active. It's also a partnership with Minnesota. They are very active, and they sample, they can process a lot of our milfoil samples that we send out there. They are keeping the database, so all plant managers and fish biologists around the country can access that database. They send a plant out there, they find out they have a specific strain, they can look up what type of herbicides have been used on that plant in other states, and also find out if what they're planning to use is effective on that particular strain of milfoil. So Iowa does have hybrid milfoil populations. We have a couple in western Iowa at a place called Mill Creek. We've treated that with sonar and eliminated it. And we have a hybrid variety in Black Pit and Mason City, and we have treated that. So we'll talk about that. You can take a nap now. All right, so here's that milfoil mapper that Montana State keeps for all of us plant managers. So this is what we know about the Clear Lake population. These are all the samples taken in the Midwest, and as we take more samples, we're going to learn more about this plant. But in particular, we sent samples away from Clear Lake in the fall of 2023, and it is a unique strain. It has not been sampled anywhere in the Midwest. That's not as important as you think it sounds, because there's probably milfoil in Minnesota that's very, very similar to it, if not the same. It just hasn't been tested yet. We're in the very early stages of testing our milfoil population, so it is unique to Clear Lake, as we know. There's no evidence of resistance to sonar. Nobody's tested it. That typically, if it's a pure Eurasian water milfoil, it is susceptible to sonar. We have treated this particular variety of milfoil twice now. We treated once on the north side of the lake and once on the south side of the lake with Priscillacor and Diquat. Both times in those zones, it appears that we got effective control on the plant. So it's not showing us anything alarming that it's some super plant that can withstand herbicide. So this is the Mason City area. So just east of Clear Lake here, we've got a couple pits that we've been managing some milfoil, and it popped up a couple years ago. We've had those plants genetically sampled. We actually sent them in 2021, and they actually ran these. You typically have to pay an amount to get these ran. These sat in their hopper, and they ended up processing for us. So Black Pit actually is a unique strain of hybrid milfoil. So because of that, and the system that it's in, Black Pit has a little bit more flow through than, say, Blue Pit. We went into that one 2 or 3 weeks ago and treated that with Priscillacor EC. That one has been managed. It appears that those plants are dying. We're keeping an eye on that. There was also a private pond just downstream from that we also treated with Priscillacor to get a handle on that, because it appeared that they had the same hybrid milfoil. Blue Pit, we sent in 3 samples. And we have 3 unique Eurasian water milfoils in Blue Pit, and it's not the same that is in Clear Lake. So that seems really weird, but it's because we don't have a lot of other lakes sampled in the Midwest. That one is currently in its 5th or 6th week of sonar AS treatment. We've been monitoring that treatment. Those plants are bleaching out and dying. We have applied a bump to the system in concentration, but that one is currently in management, and those plants appear to be responding to the treatment that we're conducting there. So that kind of paints a picture of what we're doing around Clear Lake to protect Clear Lake. Now what we've done at Clear Lake itself, 2023, as Scott mentioned, he identified, it was an angler that found it, alerted us. We went out here. We surveyed the heck out of the lake. They surveyed the heck out of the lake. It was really hard to find the plant. It was a needle in a haystack in this zone. At the time, the best practice that we could do is we're going to do something about this zone. There's probably milfoil somewhere else in the lake, but we can't find it. We can't treat what we can't find. We know we can treat this. So we treated this zone, which was 15.5 acres with Priscilla Core in the spring of 2024. That was with Priscilla Core. We continued surveys throughout 2024. They had a watercraft inspector that kept an eye on boat ramps and access points. We had a vegetation team that went out and conducted comprehensive and presence absence. There's a different type of vegetation survey. Did 4 of those this summer looking for that milfoil. The problem is you guys have a ton of curly-leaf pondweed as well, and that makes finding milfoil really, really hard because curly-leaf pondweed can actually outcompete milfoil in some situations. And once that curly-leaf senesced and died back, Scott called and said, I got really good news for you. There's milfoil out there. So we came up, we looked at, Scott identified where it was, we put together a quick attack plan. Internally, we got some dicot on hand, that Reward and Tribune, and we came up and we treated in August of 24, so just last month. We treated 150 acres where we found that milfoil and those surveys. We're continuing to monitor that. It looks like that treatment worked. You're not finding any milfoil alive in that zone. Those are all good signs that this milfoil isn't, going to resist what we're trying to do to it. Boat ramp surveillance. So with this, when you get a big lake like this, the number one thing you want to do is reduce the risk of milfoil leaving the lake. So we immediately last fall put together a plan to manage every boat ramp if we needed to. That chemical is on hand, and we can pull the trigger on that treatment within a day if it's found. So far, this plan has not been used because milfoil has not been found anywhere near a boat ramp, but we are prepared at any given time to treat any or all of the boat ramps on Clear Lake. Then this is the next step. You do a large-scale spot treatment. So these are kind of the 3 things you can do. This was the large-scale spot treatment we had to do. So we kept an eye on boat ramps. Boat ramps looked good. Scott found a large area of milfoil, so we went in and did a large spot treatment. That's the 150-acre spot treatment out by Farmers Beach Access that was treated just last month. So I've rambled long enough here. Let's the management options that we have for moving forward. We have either spot treatment of a boat ramp areas. We have large spot treatments of 150, 200, 300 acres, or we can treat the whole lake. It is a possibility to treat the whole lake. We've kind of laid out how we do this. You've got systemic or contact herbicides, large spot treatment where you can use Priscilla Core or dicot. What you're going to find out is when we get into some of these larger spot treatments with Priscilla Core, sometimes managing 200 or 300 acres with Priscilla Core costs more than managing the whole lake with sonar. So those are economics that we have to think about. And then the whole lake, systemic herbicide, that's going to be sonar is what we pick. You may have heard that we've done that over at East Okoboji. We treated East Okoboji the very same way with sonar. That was treated in the fall, winter of 2022, 2023. We do 2 surveys in the spring and in the fall on that system. We have not found milfoil in East Okoboji since that treatment. We need to be aware that if you do a treatment like that, it could be reintroduced the next year. There's a number of factors that the plant could wind up back in, but that whole lake treatment gives us the best chance of eliminating the plant from Clear Lake. So this is what a spot treatment on a boat ramp looks like. We have 2 options once we do a spot treatment here. And the main thing on those is, as I mentioned, dicot, we're going to kill everything in that area. That has some pros, also has some cons. If we use dicot in this boat ramp, we're going to kill every plant in there. So there's going to be less likely that any aquatic plants leave that boat ramp on a trailer. But what that does is it opens up an area for Eurasian water milfoil to float in, fall out, colonize, start growing. So that's the risk with just going scorched earth on that boat ramp with dicot. Our other option is Priscilla Core. Priscilla core is very selective. It only, in most of the plants in your lake, Priscilla core is only labeled to really control the Eurasian water milfoil. You can treat an area with pondweeds and other native plants, and the only plant that's going to die in there is Eurasian water milfoil, because Priscilla core is a very targeted herbicide. The pros of that is you got natives in there competing. Milfoil shouldn't be able to come in and be established, but milfoil could float in there, stick to a native plant, and then find its way out. So there's pros and cons there. Priscilla core costs quite a bit more to do the treatments there. And we'll have to evaluate what type of boat ramp treatment we want to do as they happen. The large-scale spot treatment. Again, our two options are diquat or Priscilla core. We have the same pros and cons that we just talked about for the boat ramp. The one thing I would mention is as we start getting into spot treatments like this that are 150 or more acres with a mean depth of 8 or 9 feet, and you're having to use 3 to 5 PDU, which is called prescription dose unit of Priscilla core, that treatment of Priscilla core is approaching the cost of what it would treat the whole lake with Sonar AS. So if we wanted to get into large-scale spot treatments with Priscilla core, wouldn't take very many treatments, and we'd be at the cost of just treating the whole clear lake to get rid of milfoil, and we'd be chasing it all over the lake. Otherwise, our cheaper option is diquat. What we did, this treatment with diquat is roughly going to cost $18,000 to $19,000, and it's going to kill every plant in that area. Sometimes that's a viable option, depending on if it only shows up in a few spots, and we have the resources to do this. This did take 4 boats, 4 hours to pull off this application. So the whole lake systemic herbicide treatment, because we're talking about Clear Lake, we really don't need to talk about Priscilla core. Priscilla core wouldn't be needed to treat Clear Lake because Clear Lake has a very low watershed to lake ratio. We could treat with Sonar AS just like we did on East Okoboji. We would come in the fall or in the spring. There's 2 different regimes here based on if you drew a fall treatment or a spring treatment. If we're going to do a fall treatment, we can go at a very low concentration, 5-6 parts per billion. And then we're going to monitor that for anywhere from 90 to 120 days, and we're not going to let that concentration get below 3 parts per billion. We monitor that concentration. We take water samples, little Nalgene brown bottles, ship them to CPRO. Within a couple days, they tell us what our concentration is. We can go out and add more chemical if needed. Typically, when you're going to treat with Sonar under the ice and the lake's going to ice up, Sonar is broke down a lot by sunlight. It's not getting as much sunlight degrading the chemical, so it stays in concentration a lot longer in the winter. And if you can keep it above 3 for the course of the winter, there's going to be kind of a double bang for our buck here. You're going to get the potential of eradication of Eurasian water milfoil, and you will also eliminate the curly-leaf pondweed at the same time. That curly-leaf pondweed is growing at the same time under the ice, susceptible to the same exact treatment, and it's at a very low biomass, so you're killing a very little biomass of plants, putting very little stress on the system for oxygen consumption. This will take 90 days to kill the plant. And there will be times in the spring where you go out there and you pick up a green plant and you think the milfoil is still alive. It's actually essentially a zombie plant. It's just the outside of the plant still there, but the actual plant is dead. And when you do this on curly-leaf pondweed as well, that plant can't produce a turion that year because we talked about curly-leaf pondweed produces turions. Most of the time those plants produce the turion in May, late May, early June. These plants would be dead in probably February and March. We may get some germination later in the year, but not nearly as much as if you were to kill it under the ice, because curly-leaf pondweed will germinate in October. So this treatment right here would actually give us the chance to get rid of Eurasian water milfoil and also get 1 year of control of curly-leaf pondweed. If we decided to do a spring treatment, the other thing, just quickly go back here, sorry I'm bouncing all over. A fall treatment, that herbicide is out of the system in April and May, and your natives would start germinating then. Your natives will be reduced the following year, but they will grow. That systemic herbicide will be out of the system, and that will give the natives a better chance to colonize next year. It's just that first year after a Sonar treatment, you will see a little bit of stress on the native plants. The other option is a spring treatment. Spring treatment, you have to go in with more herbicide. You have to go in at 7 to 8 parts per billion. That's because you have a shorter window to treat these plants. So your window now falls to 45 to 60 days, and you've got to keep that concentration above 5 parts per billion. So this method here is going to use more product. It's going to kill all the milfoil, but the milfoil will have a little bit more biomass. The curly leaf will have a little bit more biomass, so you're going to kill a few more plants, potentially lowering oxygen, but very unlikely because it takes so long to eliminate these plants. But that's an option to go in the spring. We're not even going to talk about Priscilla-Core because Priscilla-Core would cost 5 times what that treatment would cost. But in situations if flow are an issue, you can go in at 1 PDU to 3 PDU per acre foot to treat your Asian water milfoil with Priscilla-Core. That being said, large treatments like this require a lot of cooperation with local partners, lake groups, homeowners to pull off a treatment like this. So that's just something that we need to think about internally and externally. What do we want to see happen at Clear Lake moving into the future with the management of the Eurasian water milfoil or a potential eradication effort? And before we talk about that further, Kim has some slides to talk about. In the meantime, we know that we have some practices in place to reduce the milfoil leaving, but she's going to give us some tips on what we can do to reduce milfoil leaving.
All right, thanks, Jason. Yeah, so I'm Kim Bogenschutz, and I am the Aquatic Invasive Species Program Coordinator. So Jason and then Joel Bourne, who's over there, as well, and I are the full-time staff for the AIS program. If you have questions about zebra mussels, you can ask Joel. Questions about plants, you ask Jason. Questions about outreach, you ask me. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about how important it is, and we do this, of course, all across the state, preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species. And honestly, our boaters and anglers do a really good job of it. You may have seen what we call our watercraft inspectors, so they're college students out and about at boat ramps during the summer. They're certainly not inspecting every boat by any means, but the ones that they do, it's always consistently less than 5% of the boat that they talk to around the state every year have anything on them, and that's including zebra mussels or even a native plant, because it's illegal to transport native plants as well. So most of our boaters and anglers are doing a really good job. Hunters, people who are using our water. So just a few things. So we have signs, and again, our watercraft inspectors and our management staff help us. We have signs at all of our public boat ramps, or we hope to anyway. We have 2 different signs. One sign just has it's the law, clean, drain, dry. We have another one, it's got a big red band at the bottom that says this lake is infested with invasive species. So water bodies that do have invasive species in them, such as Clear Lake, which has curly leaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil and zebra mussels, will have the signs with the red on them. We also do other things around the state. So this is the CD3 unit. So CD3 stands for clean, drain, dry, and sometimes dispose. So this is the one at Ventura. There's one at Tourist Park. There's also one at McIntosh Woods. I'm going to show you some little simpler versions later on. These are meant to give boaters and anglers the tools that they need to clean off their boats and drain their boats, which, again, that's law. You have to clean and drain before you leave a boat ramp. So they have grabber tools. They have plug wrench tools, brushes. This one's got an air hose. Some of the one at Tourist Park and the big one at McIntosh have vacuums. People use them, so there's software that lets us know how many times the tools are used. Honestly, I just looked at the McIntosh Woods one from 2023. I don't have the 2024 report yet. And per month, the veg tool and the wrench tool are used the most, but it's like around 50 times per month. So they're really not used that often, but they are tools that you know, people say, oh, well, I can't, you know, get under my boat or whatever and pull things off. Well, we're giving you the tools to try to do that. So that's an option. We, here's the little trailer stickers that we give to boaters and anglers. I do ads on news stations, so this is what they consider a takeover, like we'll take over their weather page or things like that. So visitors that are coming in and are looking for the weather, or even locals, they'll see messages. This is one of our watercraft inspectors. This is one of the newer things that we use, and it's called geofencing. And what it does is, if you have a smartphone and you have locations on your smartphones, and if you have that location on, if you drive into a particular area, you may get an ad that pops up and it'll say, you know, clean, drain, dry, and click here. Restaurants, there's so many businesses that do it, and you may not know. I think it's creepy, but it's effective. So next slide. I don't have, this is an example. So this is the Hetty Elston boat ramp on East Okoboji Lake. And the thing that we do with the geofencing, and we have a fence at McIntosh Woods at that boat ramp and at the Clear Lake Park, or the City Park one too, is that we can make it be very specific to the boat ramp and not the road. So we're not, because it costs money, right? So, and actually it's really cheap. 400,000 ads for about $5,000. So it's really pretty cheap. But we don't want the people on the road that don't even have a boat or anything. So, you know, we can get really specific with our geofences. And in fact, this year we did one in East Okoboji, in the water, before you go under to West Okoboji. And why we probably won't be able to analyze any results from that, because then it flooded. So this is one, and so it's something, you know, that we could do. It again, it's relatively inexpensive. You don't hit everybody, but the people who do this for me, the marketing firms, they use Iowa DNR as examples for both this and the webpage ones, because people actually click through, and that means they actually click on the link to go to our webpage and learn more information at a higher rate than any other that they found. Now that high rate is less than 10%, but that's high for advertising, because how many of you, when you see an ad on Facebook, do you actually click on it or something like that? So, and we target our license, our fishing license holders and our boat registered boat owners as well. Okay, so next slide. So this is something that I talked to the APCL about at their picnic about a month ago. So those big CD3 units cost anywhere from $15,000 to $45,000. That's a lot of money. And they require maintenance, and they require us to pay for the software annually. And so there are lake associations in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan that are doing these simple things, right? So this is a real simple one. So that's a sign, the same size as our infested signs. They've got the wrench tool. They have a weed stick, which is it's a stick with kind of, it hooks on the end, but it doesn't scratch your boat. I don't know how to describe it. These guys could describe it better. And it's got a grabber tool. And so we could put something like this up and have logos on it as well. So we could have the Clear Lake Protective Association on it. We could have City of Clear Lake. We could have our new DNR logo, which if any of you are wondering, this is our new DNR logo. So that's a really simple small one. Or this is more of a kiosk one where they put a lot of different information up there. They also have a garbage for bait and things like that. The thing is, you have to have at least a little bit of space for boats to be able to utilize these tools. So you can't just, you don't want to block access. But these aren't just effective for the Eurasian water milfoil. It is for the curly-leaf pondweed and the zebra mussels, and the zebra mussels that attach to the curly-leaf pondweed and the Eurasian water milfoil and all the other plants that are in there as well. If you ever haven't noticed, just pull up some veg. You might call them weeds sometime, and you'll probably see little zebra mussels attached to them. This year was a phenomenal reproduction year for zebra mussels. And so you may see lots of little ones if you haven't pulled your boats or lifts out yet. And we'll see how that translates into next year. That's all I had.
Okay, kind of like to hear from you folks. I mean, we don't really have a direction. Anybody have any thoughts on the Eurasian water milfoil and any of those options? Like Jason mentioned, you know, Iowa's been proactive in almost every instance we've discovered it. I recently got done with a meeting with the Minnesota DNR, and if you looked at his milfoil tracker, you know, the cat's out of the bag in Minnesota. They just don't have the resources to attack all those water bodies. But open it up to you guys. Joel's got a microphone. If somebody wants to ask myself or one of those guys a question, go for it.
Yeah, Scott, have you guys been checking from the Yurts's dock all the way west to where the new outfit come in with their slips that they rent out? As when we bought our place there was a lot of them weeds growing at that time. And I tried to get the guys that were going to dredge the lake to come in through there and take a bunch of that stuff out. But they said they wouldn't do it. And I thought, well, that's not very smart if you're going to clean some and not all of it.
Yeah, so I can't speak for exactly where those transects are located, but do you know how many transects we were surveying through that Little Lake stretch by chance, Jason, without?
Little Lake?
Yeah, the west end.
The Little Lake itself probably has 12 or 13 different transects evenly spaced throughout it. We start at shore and work out every 2 feet.
And so what that is we got a crew of summer kids that are doing these vegetation assessments, and they got a GPS point on the bank, and they go out from bank until they run out of plants. And so lake-wide, that's kind of how we discovered the most recent Eurasian milfoil over at Farmers Beach. But that also gives us annual year-to-year tracking of that plant canopy like you're discussing there. So yeah, we do a number of surveys through that whole stretch.
What does that chemical do to the water lilies?
I think not much, but Jason's the expert. Usually you have to go to more of a 2,4-D based herbicide.
The water lilies, particularly if we do a winter treatment or a fall treatment, they won't actively be growing. Also, when we talk about summer, the one thing I didn't say is the maximum label rate's 150. We're using it at 5. We're really selecting milfoil at curly leaf. At that point, those are really the only plants that are eliminated at that dose. Some other plants could be stressed, but water lilies are certainly not one that we see a lot of stress at that concentration. Plus, by the time they would start actively growing, that herbicide should be out of the system.
I got one last question. At one time, there was a guy coming just right west of our place, taking pictures of the water lilies were yellow. I asked him what he was doing. He said, I'm taking pictures of these water lilies. I said, where did they come from? He said, we planted them here. And I said, you did what? He said, oh, no, we didn't do that, Now I see the yellow ones are over towards the Yurts's dock this summer more so.
Who was the individual?
I think it was Lowell Sandburn or whatever.
Lowell Washburn?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
And he soon backtracked when I questioned him about it. And I thought, how dumb can you be when you bring that stuff in And when we wanted to try to get rid of it.
Yeah, and I can speak for that. We didn't plant them. I would have been the one, because I was working, would have been,
Well,
and
why would he told me that?
that I can't answer.
Okay,
But as far as the water lilies go, and I noticed a lot more white water lilies, especially through the Ventura grade, and I think down there in that yurt corner.
right.
And not that we have to mimic what other states do. Minnesota won't even let you pull those out. They're protected in Minnesota, the white water lilies, so.
I'm right next to them, over
Yep.
there where you guys put the new kayak launch a couple years ago. People don't even use that anymore.
Yeah,
They-
but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
white water lilies are a valuable aquatic plant. I'm not saying they can't cause navigation.
It's frustrating because they're growing so much.
Yeah,
If I take a week off of boating, I can't, they're just flying all over the place. I
Yeah.
can't get through there with my boat. I mean, it's
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
I don't know what's underneath there. I mean, the picture you guys see, it looks like there's everything underneath there. I mean, it's just.
yeah.
junk
So,
over there.
so the Eurasian water milfoil, the non-native species that we're dealing with, the depths we found those is 6 to 9 feet.
Yeah,
We're not finding them in shallow water.
So what,
Yeah.
is there, we're running out on the right subject, is there anything we can do over in our area, over there in McIntosh? And
Well,
I mean,
with
it's
the,
awful over there.
yeah, with the dock permits, we do allow mechanical harvest, and I know I've talked to Russ and Carol, and I'm not sure if I've talked to you. We do allow the mechanical removal, but it's not without work and effort. And like you said, if you're using your navigation path a lot, the boat can be your navigation, your mechanical, but it will fill in, just like not mowing your lawn, it's gonna grow.
Seems like the lily pads have taken over in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
They never used to be
Most-
even near there, now they're completely across.
Yeah,
it.
most of those spread by what's called a rhizome, so it's got a root that's going horizontally and shooting new spikes up.
Can they be treated with anything, so there's a kayak path or anything through there?
Herbicide works. We don't obviously treat individual shoreline property owners. We can definitely entertain, maybe we can, with that new kayak launch, we might be able to treat a path there that you could link into that would make, your distance of management shorter.
Yeah, maybe, I think, I listen to people talk when they get in out, in the spring they're down there, and as soon as those suckers start growing, it's just,
Yeah.
they can't get around.
Yep.
If we just had the one little exit out of there, I mean,
Yeah, and that's that rhizome growth, it's spreading even across, your typical path out. It's got roots there to produce the shoot spurs. It's just with lack of activity, it's gonna do that, so.
And the other problem is, Russ and I own 150 feet of shoreline. For what? We couldn't get out there with anything. You can't even walk out there, it's muck, it's horrible. I almost got stuck trying to get some of the reeds off yesterday with the big boots.
Yeah,
It's useless, and I'm paying a fortune in taxes for 150 feet of shoreline.
Yeah.
Most people don't have that much. It's frustrating for we as well as our neighbors and other neighbors too. It was never like that when we bought the place 30 years ago. There was not one lily pad. So somehow or another they've gotten started, and it's very, very frustrating for us who are living there.
yeah, so, we kind of talked about that at the beginning. Clear Lake does have aquatic plant communities now that it didn't in the past. And mainly that's due to the carp population. If you look back after the winter kill of the late 70s, the carp population exploded. And if you have a carp-dominated system, you don't have hardly any aquatic plants. With the water quality improvements, we've increased sunlight penetration, plus the carp are, I wouldn't call them at historic low levels, but they're at low levels compared to the 80s and the 90s. So I guess the best way to describe a carp is it's kind of like having cattle in a pasture. You drive by a pasture that's full of cattle, it looks like lawn, right? You don't see any plants growing up. You take the cattle off the pasture for 2 seasons, what do you have? You have tall grass and vegetation growing up. So kind of using that analogy in the lake is the lake's in a healthier state because it should have aquatic plants, and we went through several decades where we really didn't, except for the emergent vegetation like the bulrushes and things like that. So We realize they're problematic, they can be. You know, with the dock permits, you know, we do allow that mechanical harvest around the docks. We don't currently allow the whole frontage to be treated like your 150 foot, but your high use area of your dock and for your navigation channel, you know, we do that. But, you know, we can work with the parks folks at McIntosh. Maybe we can, you know, get that navigation channel with that kayak launch, and I think that lies relatively close to the area you're talking. Yeah. Yep.
Even if there's just one channel to that.
But it does take a different herbicide. You know, most of that requires, isn't it 2,4-D based?
Well, it'd be glyphosate based. And to be clear, if that management activity started, the biggest thing with water lilies that people see is if we put together a management plan to manage it, the best time to manage water lilies is first year is gonna be tough because you manage that plant after it's produced, sent all of its energy out, and at the end of the summer it's flowered, produced its seed, and it's pulling back. That's the only time that plant's gonna uptake herbicide. If you try to spray that plant in June or July, you're gonna burn it and it will recover, and sometimes it will actually recover and then send more energy into growth. So you can cause yourself more problems doing that early. So if we looked at doing a treatment like that as a kayak ramp, we'd have to be very clear that that treatment probably will not take place till that first August. And what happens is that's gonna take that herbicide down to the rhizome and get longer year-to-year control. And those treatments would have to take place probably 2 or 3 years in a row, and you'd start to see an area open up where you damage rhizomes, where if you try to spray it in May or June when you see it coming up, you're just gonna waste herbicide.
So they need to be sprayed about right now.
Right now is typically when we're doing those types of treatments in
Early
cattails.
September, yeah. Back to Eurasian water milfoil. Anybody have any questions? Margot?
Listening to the presentation tonight, I would want to ask the question, when would be the ideal treatment for Eurasian water milfoil and curly leaf? And what would be the duration of the treatment? How long would it take? And what precautions are needed during the treatment process?
I'm gonna handle that, maybe come up to the mic, so make sure we get that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Margot's question for the folks maybe out in YouTube world, was when is the ideal time to do this treatment for both eradication of milfoil and control of curly leaf pondweed? And what are some precautions and some other situations during this treatment? Right now for curly leaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil, we are actually effectively treating in the fall under the ice and through spring. So that would go in at a very low concentration compared to what we would do in a summer treatment. And that would get us curly leaf pondweed control. It would get us the best chance of Eurasian water milfoil eradication. During that treatment, so sonar at 5 parts per billion has no restrictions on swimming, fishing, even at irrigation. At irrigation, restrictions start at 10 parts per billion, but I hope nobody's watering their grass in December. So doing this treatment throughout the winter months, we're gonna see very little impact on anything. There's no restrictions on activities out there in the winter. The biggest thing would be us just getting that application on Clear Lake before the ice set in. And then monitoring it through winter, and we would not want to see that concentration fall below 3 parts per billion. Other than that, there's not a lot of precautions. This shouldn't cause, and typically we have used sonar in very small, poor water quality ponds in Des Moines Metro that have very little oxygen, and we have not caused fish kills doing this method just because of the time it takes to eliminate that plant. You're really not seeing sonar being the reason for an oxygen sag. Clear Lake might have issues with oxygen in the winter, but this isn't going to add to it, if that makes sense.
Would the aerator still be used during that time?
Yeah, so the question was, would the aerators be used? You know, the aerators were stimulated by the winter kill that I referenced earlier in the late 70s. And then we had another near close call in the mid 80s. the way winter aeration works is you need to create that open space where water contacts air from the beginning. So the answer to that is yes, we'd operate the winter aeration system the same with or without that treatment. The aeration system might actually benefit the treatment in a little bit, because like Jason alluded to, you put your initial dose on and then you monitor it through the winter, and it may require a bump. Well, what that bump means is we're going to be drilling holes in the ice and pouring herbicide below the ice. But by having the open holes with a little wind on it, those anglers that are listening, or myself, you know, if you're near the aeration system on a real windy day, there's a little water movement under there. You know, I mean, you notice it on your fishing line, and that's going to benefit that bump. Because I haven't even asked Jason if we go down this road and we have to bump this, how many holes we need to drill in 4,000 acre lake. But we're going to be out there spreading it throughout the basin the best we can, but the aeration activity is probably going to benefit the treatment too. Not the reason we're running it, obviously, but it'll be a side benefit of having it going.
And then how long will it take to do the treatment initially?
So the interesting part, and I'll turn this over to Jason, because this surprised me, and I've done a couple of these winter treatments, and the product is pretty amazing. Jason said the spot treatment took 4 boats 4 hours. I think 1 or 2 boats could probably do it in less than 4 hours, but I'll let Jason speak.
We could treat the whole lake in the same time we treated the 150 acres. So to wrap our head around this, that product mixes really well. The wind's going to help us mix it. We're probably going to have a couple boats diluting this with water because sonar in the jug looks like a milkshake. It's very thick. The main thing to get application is to mix with water so it comes out of the spray tank and the prop wash kind of in a diluted manner. Otherwise, we'll plug our sprayers. We could go a lot faster if our sprayers could process that milkshake. To paint a picture of how much product it's going to take, the initial dose would take 134 gallons to treat the whole lake. That's what 5 parts per billion in Little Clear Lake and what we call proper Clear Lake. We would break this into, we would treat them as 2 separate lakes. Little Clear Lake would get its dose, Main Clear Lake would get its dose, and it would take 134 to treat both. And it would take, East Okoboji took us probably 3 hours. And we broke East Okoboji into 3 separate basins just the way it lays. And fast testing is you drill a hole and you collect a bottle. We would probably take a fast test in Clear Lake proper and Little Lake, just because the narrows there could create a difference in concentration, but the rest of the system will mix rather well.
So you're leaning toward treating the whole lake with the sun?
That would be the best that would be our best chance at eliminating Eurasian water milfoil, and we know that it would give us 1 year of control of curly leaf. Curly leaf turions, and if I'm talking about curly leaf, I didn't show you what that looked like. It's a plant that's out there in the spring. You've seen it. It dies back in the summer. Windrows on your shore. The leaves look like lasagna noodles. This would eliminate that plant for next growing season. The problem with curly leaf, its turions are in the sediment from 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, and they're still viable. We've had some smaller systems that we've renovated. We've flipped from that turbid water state to a clear water state with a lake restoration program. We might have had a record of 1 curly leaf plant back in the 60s, and it goes to that clear water state, and all of a sudden curly leaf's there the next year. So those turions for curly leaf, we would frankly only get 1 year of control on those plants. But our best chance at eradication is with sonar, the whole lake.
Will they be gone after 1 year, you think, the duration?
If we don't have a reintroduction, this treatment method has worked. We've used it. The goal would be to eradicate the milfoil in the lake. Now, if a boat brings it in 2 years or 3 years, then we'd have to approach that at that time. But I want to be abundantly clear that could happen. I mean, that is a possibility. Clear Lake has a lot of traffic. that's something to think about when we're going down this road.
What's the chances of this weed coming out of Crystal Lake, coming back into Clear Lake?
Hopefully it doesn't, because we treated Crystal Lake. Crystal Lake has been treated and we have not found milfoil in it in the last 3 years.
Boy, that area up there of ours was terrible when we had a 5-inch rain. It was really blacked up with those weeds.
Yeah, there's curly leaf there. So curly leaf pondweed is at Crystal Lake, but you just reminded me, Crystal Lake is in a 5-year treatment. Last winter, it got its first dose of Sonar, this product. Crystal Lake is getting treated for curly leaf pondweed to see if we can actually reduce the turion abundance and the sediment. So the seeds of curly leaf. Curly leaf is obviously a different animal, but because we're going to be effectively treating that for 4 more winters, if milfoil were to find its way back into Crystal Lake, we're going to kill it with our curly leaf management. So that actually plays well if we decide to do something larger scale here, which would go along with what we're doing in Mason City. We're just trying to reduce those other populations that could find its way back in. But Crystal Lake will be getting treated again this winter to control curly leaf pondweed.
How does that application affect the turions?
So the goal, it's a great question, how does an application affect the turions for curly leaf? What we want is those curly leaf plants to germinate right now. And we're finding in some of our lakes in this part of the state, they're germinating in September and October. By the time November and December get here, those plants are 18 to 24 inches tall. So then they go into ice condition, just kind of sustaining themselves until that ice comes off, and then they start growing again, which is why they can outcompete our native species. Our hope is, and what we have found in other lakes in Iowa, is we treat it in the fall and in the winter. We kill the plant before it can produce a turion. So hopefully we're allowing turions in the sediment to germinate. We kill that plant before it produces a turion. We do that multiple years in a row. Hopefully we see a reduction of turions in the sediment, and we are starting to look at that this year. Crystal Lake will be getting, we'll have, don't quote me, 18 or 24 sites selected around the lake where we're going to be taking an actual petite ponar dredge out there and capturing a portion of the sediment, sifting it through a bucket with 1 millimeter screen on the bottom and counting all the turions in those known locations. And as we do this treatment and we stretch it out 4 or 5 more years, we hope that we would see an actual reduction of turions in that sediment, which would show us that we can actually reduce the abundance of curly leaf.
But is there any body of water that comes from Crystal Lake to Clear Lake? Any dredge
No, there's-
or anything?
No.
There isn't.
There's no
Crystal Lake
connection.
goes to the Iowa River, so it's
Yeah.
in the Iowa River drainage, and everything from Clear Lake goes to the Winnebago. There's no water
Oh,
out
okay.
there across.
I'm encouraged with your aggressive attitude on all the research and everything that you've done. That's really awesome. So when will this decision be made for Clear Lake, and who will the decision make? Are we looking at it?
Well, I'm looking at one of our internal help here. We're going through that internally right now as to what the DNR has available to do this treatment and what kind of partnership would be needed to pull this treatment off. And George obviously represents the Lake Restoration Program.
Sure, I could briefly talk to that.
So I also serve George and Michelle's program as well.
That's a strong word. But yeah, George, and I've met some of you before, obviously, over the years, and I work for the Lake Restoration Program, so statewide, and so obviously with our program, Clear Lake has been kind of one of our more intensive projects over the years, and obviously a strong partnership with you locally for a lot of things that have happened from dredging to the Army Corps relationship with Ventura and Marsh. And so for us program-wise, I just more taking an opportunity to learn along with you. Obviously you have the experts here in terms of what's happening with your lake and what is going on from a vegetation perspective. Program-wise, our interest is to try to maintain and enhance as best we can the positive kind of strides we've made in water quality, try to maximize that balanced aquatic community. So we are kind of looking to see what the comfort level is with the community. We know that kind of one of these whole lake approaches, as has been mentioned, is you know, a recommendation from our end in terms of how maybe to be more aggressive with milfoil. And understanding your comfort level would then allow us to kind of plan on actually moving forward this fall. So we do have a budget identified to try to move forward. We have probably we have a few different funding sources that we can draw from, program included. We also have a few other within the DNR, like marine fuel tax and some other things. So feel pretty comfortable that we could implement a large-scale effort if we needed to this fall. A little less clear with some of the things Jason talked about maintaining that concentration. We talked about those bumps that happen. Also require a funding source and some of that fast testing. How do we monitor the concentration? So, you know, there's still some opportunities for a local partnership. We would kind of want to have those conversations in terms of what that could look like, whether it's your group, a combination of city, county, local groups. So yeah, feel comfortable that we could tackle the large scale application. Still haven't quite identified a full budget for some of those supplemental things that would maybe have to happen through the winter and spring.
Can you give us an idea what the full budget is, what it would cost to do the whole program?
Yeah.
So the 5-part per billion dose would cost about $279,000. A 1 part per billion bump is about, what I tell you, 56,000 for a 1 part per billion. That's, as we look forward, we know our volume estimates are accurate. We know we would probably hit the 5 parts per billion. The bumps, that's what Mother Nature is going to throw at us. If we get an early ice up and we hold that 5, we might not fall below 3 until ice out. And again, we only need to stay above 3. Okoboji behaved, we've treated Okoboji under the ice a couple of years, once for the milfoil, but we've been treating the upper basin for several years for curly leaf. There's been years where hardly any bump is needed, and there's been years where we have to come in with 2, 3, sometimes in the extreme, we have to have enough for a 4 part per billion bump. So what that would look like at Clear Lake, the 1 part per billion bump, whole basin would be 56,000. Now, if the main basin of Clear Lake is at, say, 4, and Little Clear Lake's at, say, needs a 1, it's a lot cheaper to bump Little Clear Lake at 1 part per billion. That 56 just paints the picture. If the whole system needs a 1 part per billion bump, it's about $56,000.
Is that cost based, is that just the material cost, or does that include labor?
We're the labor.
Okay, that's what, so that's just for the material.
We're the labor. That material cost is contract pricing, and what we've worked out with other communities that help us on these projects, we work with our vendor that we get our sonar from to get the folks that want to buy products. So Lake Cornelia, Okoboji, when they wanted to buy products to support our work, they have paid our contract price through that vendor and just paid them directly, because changing money here is really messy.
And the other thing, as far as those bumps go, and like Jason said, Mother Nature's the, kind of in the steering of that. Look at this last year. We just came out of those drought years, and then all of a sudden, boom, we had, I think the highest the lake got was 8-9 inches over the weir. The last time I looked at the gauge, I think we're currently about 2 inches or 3 below. If we stay below and we don't have water flowing out, because if water's flowing out, so is the sonar. And that's the unknown. We could put it on and then all of a sudden get torrential rains. That might create a need for that additional bump. If we freeze over and we stay similar water level that we see today, we may not need a bump. But that's what the fast test, that's why, these are really prescribed, fine-tuned treatments that we just got to stay right on top of, because you obviously don't want to spend $279,000 and walk away from it and just hope your concentration's where it's at. That's why the testing is really important. Yeah, sometimes you can temporarily sandbag. The winter time might make that a challenge if we had ice too. So
sounds like precipitation is a major factor in these bumps required.
It's the one more obvious one. Obviously, there's other things that can tie the product up, but, you know, under the ice cover scenario, when you don't have 30-mile-an-hour winds on the surface, I think you get less chance that organic matter and other things are going to bind some of the active ingredient. Would you agree?
And sunlight.
Sunlight, too, is...
The ice coverage would give us protection from sunlight, which some sonar is very susceptible to sunlight degrading it.
And if we have a winter like last winter, we had sunlight and we had open water through most of the winter on a good portion of the lake. So that's kind of the unknowns, you know, going into it.
But in the winter, we have a lot less light too, where that's something else to think about. There's less periods of light, so.
Any other comments? I mean, we can all hang around here. Happy to, I've had a couple people, you know, contact me and they're confident they got this plant by their dock, and most of the time they're IDing something different. So we're happy to show you what to look for. It's not real abundant out there. It's, you know, when we did our spot looks, we had to look, you know, it's not like it's widespread, but with a plant that fragments and starts, you know, the thing I use, and I know we probably got a few people here that like to have house plants. If you take that house plant, you know, and cut that little piece and stick it in water and roots form, that's what we're talking about, fragmentation. And that's why we were so quick and so aggressive on that 150 acres out there, because it was literally getting right up to the prop zone. That's how high it was. And if we had the month of August and September with boats going right through that 150 acres, they'd be shattering those plants, and who knows what next year would have looked like, you know, because they were on sonar, they were already in 6 to 9 foot of water, they were up 3 to 4 feet. So.
Was that outside of farmers too?
Yeah, so the 150 acres really started just through the channel narrows to the south,
Yes.
and then went most of the way over to Dodge's Point, but it was in that south half. So what people call Farmers Beach, Clawson's Cove, the Iowa Natural Heritage piece there.
Yeah. Yeah, you could see them. I saw them.
Yeah, and a lot of...
They're like 2 or 3 foot underwater.
Yeah, you could see them. If you had a sonar, you could see the plants going up, and that wasn't all 100% Eurasian, because there's curly leaf in that same bed like we talked about. And we were seeing curly leaf, you know, maybe 18 inches tall too. But any other questions? Well, we'll wrap it up. Like I said, feel free to come up and talk to any of us here. We're glad to stick around and answer your questions. I'll go over, or Jason can help me maybe kind of show you the characteristics of the plant. If somebody sees that plant or sees something they think it might be, we want to know about it, whether it's Clear Lake, whether it's any other lake you recreate in, because a lot of times, just like the first piece discovered on Clear Lake, it was a muskie angler getting it on his muskie bait. Little fortunate it was our past aquatic invasive species boat ramp inspector that got it on his muskie bait. But the more people that know what Eurasian looks like, I think it's going to help us out statewide as well. So thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.
You do.